Stop the car. Immediately!
The red and blue lights illuminated the SUV.
Get out, all of you.
Officer, what do we do?
Shut up! You all look suspicious.
Stay still. A fat, dirty black man in a nice car? That looks suspicious.
I'm sorry, sir. We didn't do anything.
Shut up, woman.
Say another word and you'll be handcuffed too.
A large man stepped out. Silent. Calm. The officer shoved him down onto the hood, his knee pressed against his back. The handcuffs clicked.
Lie down, fat man. You people are making me sick.
He didn't resist. He said nothing. He just stood there, handcuffed, breathing slowly. Then the officer searched his bulletproof vest. He found an ID card, which made his face turn pale instantly. Ridgewood, Georgia. Population 43,000. The kind of town where everybody knew your name, your business, and the color of your skin, and judged you for at least 2 of the 3. For 112 years, every mayor who sat behind the oak desk at City Hall had one thing in common. They were white. Every single one. The portraits lined the hallway like a timeline of sameness. Pale faces, firm jaws, American flags pinned to their lapels. No one ever questioned it. That was just how Ridgewood worked. Until 3 weeks ago. Malcolm Foster won the election by 418 votes. The tightest race in the city's history. Half the town celebrated. The other half couldn't believe it. A black man. A large, heavy, unapologetic black man. 280 pounds, 6'2", with hands the size of dinner plates and a voice that could fill a courtroom without a microphone. He didn't look like the mayors before him. He didn't sound like them. He didn't move like them. And that made a lot of people in Ridgewood very uncomfortable. But Malcolm didn't run for mayor to make people comfortable. He ran because the police department had 17 excessive force complaints in 2 years, and not one officer had been disciplined. He ran because the schools on the east side, the black side, hadn't been renovated since 1986. He ran because his mother, who had cleaned houses in Whitmore Hills for 30 years, was never once invited inside through the front door. He won. And he hadn't even had time to unpack the boxes in his new office. Tonight was Saturday, the first real evening off since the inauguration. No council meetings, no press, no phone calls from donors asking for favors. Just dinner. Malcolm, his wife Denise, and his cousin Calvin at a little barbecue spot on Elm Street that had been serving ribs since before any of them were born. Denise sat in the passenger seat, still laughing about something Calvin had said at the table. She had this laugh, loud, full-bodied, the kind that made strangers smile even when they didn't know the joke. She reached back and squeezed Malcolm's knee. "You actually relaxed tonight. First time in 3 weeks." Malcolm smiled from the back seat. His jacket was off. His tie was loose. For the first time since election night, the weight on his shoulders felt almost manageable. "Don't get used to it," he said. "Monday's gonna hit different." Calvin drove. Steady, careful, both hands on the wheel. He always drove like that, especially in Ridgewood, especially at night, especially in neighborhoods where the houses had columns and the driveways had gates. Calvin understood the rules. Every black man in this town did. Don't speed, don't swerve, don't give them a reason. The SUV turned onto Whitmore Hills Road. Old oaks lined both sides, their branches reaching over the pavement like a cathedral ceiling. The streetlights here were warm and golden, not the harsh white fluorescence they used on the east side. Every lawn was manicured, every mailbox was polished. Every house whispered money. This was old Ridgewood. The Ridgewood that had voted against Malcolm. The Ridgewood that still referred to the east side as over there. The Ridgewood where a black family in a dark SUV, driving 10 miles under the speed limit, could still look wrong to the right pair of eyes. And tonight, those eyes belonged to Officer Wade Pritchard. Pritchard sat in his cruiser at the intersection of Whitmore Hills and Oak Bend, parked beneath a broken streetlight. His favorite spot. 18 years on the force. 14 complaints of racial profiling, every one of them buried by a chief who owed him favors. Pritchard didn't see himself as racist. He saw himself as realistic. He knew who belonged in Whitmore Hills and who didn't. He could tell by looking. His partner, Officer Kyle Brennan, sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through his phone. 6 months on the job. Still green, still quiet. Still doing whatever Pritchard told him to do. The black SUV rolled past. Pritchard's eyes locked on it. 3 occupants, all black. Nice vehicle. Wrong neighborhood. He reached for the switch. Light 'em up, blue and red erupted behind the SUV. Calvin's hands tightened on the wheel. Denise stopped laughing. Malcolm sat up straight in the back seat and looked through the rear window at the flashing lights. He took a slow breath. "Pull over, Calvin. Nice and easy." Calvin eased the SUV onto the shoulder. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. The engine idled. Nobody moved. In the rearview mirror, the blue and red lights pulsed like a heartbeat. Steady, relentless, blinding. Calvin kept both hands on the steering wheel. 10 and 2. Exactly where they could be seen. He didn't reach for his license. Didn't reach for the glove box. Didn't make a single movement that could be misread. He knew better. Every black man in Ridgewood knew better. "Stay calm," Malcolm said from the back seat. His voice was low, even. "Hands visible. Don't argue. Let me handle it." Denise nodded, but her fingers were already curling around the door handle. Not to run, to brace. Footsteps on gravel. Slow, deliberate. The kind of walk that said, "I own this moment." A flashlight beam swept across the rear window, then the side mirror, then straight into Calvin's eyes. Pritchard appeared at the driver's window. He didn't lean down. He stood tall, one hand on his belt, the other holding the flashlight like a weapon. His jaw was set. His eyes were already judging. "License and registration." Calvin reached for his wallet. Slowly, the way his father taught him when he was 16. 2 fingers, visible at all times. He pulled out his license and handed it through the window along with the registration from the visor. Pritchard didn't look at either one. He held them loosely in his left hand and aimed the flashlight past Calvin, sweeping the beam across Denise's face, then into the back seat, where it landed on Malcolm. The light stayed there. Malcolm sat still. His hands rested on his thighs, palms down. He didn't squint, didn't flinch. Just let the light do what it was designed to do. Expose, examine, reduce. "Who's the big fella?" Pritchard said, still shining the light directly into Malcolm's face. "That's my cousin," Calvin said. "We're just coming from dinner." "Did I ask you where you were coming from?" Pritchard's jaw tightened. "I asked who that is. The fat one, in the back." Calvin swallowed. "His name is Malcolm. Malcolm Foster. He's family." Family. Pritchard said it like the word itself was suspicious. He tapped Calvin's license against the flashlight without reading it. "And what exactly is your family doing in Whitmore Hills at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night?" "Just driving home, officer." "Just driving home, through Whitmore Hills, in a $50,000 vehicle." He leaned closer and aimed the flashlight back into Malcolm's eyes. "You, big guy, you hear me talking?" "I hear you," Malcolm said. His voice was level, controlled, like a man who had practiced keeping his tone steady in rooms where one wrong inflection could cost him everything. "Then answer me. What are you doing here?" Like my cousin said, driving home from dinner. Dinner. Pritchard snorted. What kind of dinner requires 3 black folks to be cruising through the most expensive neighborhood in Ridgewood at this hour? Malcolm didn't blink. The kind with ribs and sweet tea. For a fraction of a second, something flickered behind Pritchard's eyes. Not amusement, irritation. The kind that comes when someone you've decided is beneath you refuses to act like it. All right. Pritchard stepped back from the window. Everyone out of the vehicle. Now. Denise leaned forward. Officer, we haven't done anything wrong. You can run the plates. You can check the license. We haven't broken any— Ma'am? Pritchard's voice dropped to something cold and flat, like a blade laid on a table. I said everyone out. I'm not going to ask again. But you haven't given us a reason. The reason is your whole family is looking suspicious. That's the reason. Now get out of the car before I pull you out myself. Looking suspicious. There it was. Not a crime, not a violation. A feeling, dressed up as a justification. Calvin opened his door first, slow and careful, like everything he did tonight. He stepped out with his hands slightly raised, palms open. Brennan was waiting on the passenger side, one hand resting on his holster. The young officer's face was tight, not angry, just nervous. He pointed at a spot near the trunk. Over here, sir. Calvin walked to the spot, stood still, hands at his sides. Denise got out next. Her dress caught on the seatbelt buckle, and she stumbled slightly. Brennan reached out to steady her, but Pritchard's voice cut through the air. Don't help her. She can manage. Can't you, sweetheart? Denise straightened herself. She looked at Pritchard with eyes that could have melted steel, but she bit down on her words and swallowed them whole. She walked to where Calvin stood and clasped her hands together to stop them from trembling. Then the back door opened. Malcolm stepped out, all 6'2" of him, 280 pounds. He rose from the vehicle like something inevitable, slow, deliberate, massive. His shirt stretched across his chest. His shoulders blocked the flashlight beam. He stood on the gravel shoulder of Whitmore Hills Road, and for a moment the only sound was the cruiser's engine and the chirp of crickets in the Georgia dark. Pritchard stared. Then he smiled. The kind of smile that had nothing to do with warmth, just dominance, inventory, contempt. Well, 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 look at the size of you. He circled Malcolm slowly, flashlight tracing his body from shoes to scalp. Big boy. Real big boy. Tell me something. You always sweat this much? Or is that a guilty conscience I'm smelling? Malcolm said nothing. He stood with his hands at his sides, feet shoulder-width apart, breathing. You know what I see when I look at you? Pritchard stepped closer, close enough that Malcolm could smell the stale coffee on his breath and the leather of his holster. I see a fat black man in an expensive car, in a neighborhood where fat black men don't drive expensive cars. That doesn't sit right with me. You understand? He didn't wait for an answer. Turn around, hands on the hood. Officer, I'd like to understand what legal basis— Legal basis? Pritchard laughed, short, sharp, ugly. The legal basis is I told you to. That's all the basis you need. Now turn around before I turn you around. Are you deaf or just stupid? Malcolm turned. He placed his palms flat on the warm metal of the SUV's hood. The surface still held the heat of the engine. He could feel the vibration through his fingertips, steady and mechanical, utterly indifferent to what was happening above it. Pritchard keyed his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 14. Suspicious vehicle on Whitmore Hills Road. 3 black occupants, high-value residential area. Requesting backup. 3 black occupants. High-value residential area. That was the whole probable cause. Skin color and zip code, compressed into police jargon, broadcast over a frequency that recorded everything. Calvin stood by the trunk, jaw clenched so tight the muscles in his neck were twitching. He wanted to speak. Every cell in his body wanted to scream that this was unconstitutional, that they hadn't done a single thing, that the Fourth Amendment was supposed to mean something on this street the same as any other. But he didn't. Because Calvin knew what happened to black men who raised their voices during traffic stops in small Georgia towns. He'd seen the videos. He'd read the autopsy reports. He knew exactly how thin the line was between a traffic stop and a funeral. Denise stood next to him, tears running silently down her cheeks. Not from fear, from fury. She had watched her husband knock on doors in neighborhoods exactly like this one for 3 months, shaking hands with people who wouldn't look him in the eye. She had watched him win. She had stood beside him on Inauguration Day, proud, hopeful, certain that something had changed. And now she was watching him stand with his palms flat on the hood of his own car, while a man with a badge called him suspicious for the crime of being black. Brennan shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He hadn't spoken since the stop began. His hand rested on his holster, but his grip was loose, uncertain. His eyes kept darting between Pritchard and Malcolm, and something behind those eyes, something they hadn't trained out of him yet, was whispering that this was wrong. But he didn't speak up. He never did. A second cruiser pulled up 3 minutes later. 2 more officers stepped out. They assessed the scene. A large black man spread against an SUV, a woman crying, another man rigid by the trunk, and said nothing. They took positions, flanking, watching, adding weight to the imbalance. 4 officers, 1 family, 0 crimes. Across the street, a curtain moved. A porch light flickered on. Someone in an upstairs window raised a phone and began to record. And the night was just getting started. Pritchard popped the trunk. He didn't ask, didn't request consent, didn't produce a warrant or cite probable cause. He just walked to the back of the SUV, found the release, and lifted the hatch like he owned the vehicle. Calvin stepped forward. "Hey, you can't search the car without..." "Without what?" Pritchard turned slowly, flashlight aimed at Calvin's chest. "Without your permission?" He closed the distance in 2 steps. "You want to obstruct a law enforcement officer in the execution of his duties? That's a felony in the state of Georgia. You want a felony tonight, boy?" Calvin's mouth opened, then closed. His fists balled at his sides, knuckles whitening. But he stepped back. Because he knew. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and this stop could turn into something that ended on the evening news with his mother screaming in a hospital hallway. "That's what I thought." Pritchard turned back to the trunk. He tossed things onto the road like he was emptying a dumpster. A gym bag, unzipped, contents dumped on the gravel. Protein bars, a water bottle, a pair of running shoes, scattered across the asphalt like evidence of something that didn't exist. A first aid kit, opened, bandages pulled out and dropped. A set of jumper cables, tossed aside, clanging against the pavement. Then Denise's overnight bag. Pritchard pulled it open and upended it without hesitation. Makeup, a hairbrush, a change of clothes, her reading glasses. All of it tumbling onto the dirty road for anyone to see. Denise made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob, and took a step forward. "That's my..." "Step back, ma'am, unless you want to join your husband on the hood." Denise froze. Calvin squeezed her arm. She stayed. Brennan stood behind Pritchard, arms folded, watching but not participating. Not stopping it either. His jaw was tight. His eyes were on the ground. He looked like a man trying very hard not to see what was happening right in front of him. Then Pritchard found the garment bag. He pulled it out slowly, almost theatrically, and unzipped it under the flashlight beam. Inside hung a charcoal suit, tailored, expensive, with a silk lining and a lapel pin that caught the light. The kind of suit a man wore when the room needed to listen. Pritchard held it up and let out a low whistle. "What do we have here?" He turned the suit toward Malcolm, who still stood with his palms flat on the hood, back turned. "Playing dress-up, fat boy? Who exactly are you trying to fool?" Malcolm didn't answer. "I'm talking to you." Pritchard walked the suit over and dangled it inches from Malcolm's face. "A guy your size? In a suit like this? Come on now. Who'd you steal it from? Because there's no way in hell you bought this. Not on whatever it is you do." "It's mine," Malcolm said. Quiet. Flat. "Yours." Pritchard's laugh was a sound like gravel scraping against bone. "Sure it is. And I'm the governor of Georgia." He tossed the suit onto the hood beside Malcolm's hands. The garment bag slid off the warm metal and crumpled onto the ground. The silk lining kissed the dirty asphalt. Malcolm watched it fall. He didn't pick it up. Pritchard turned to the interior next. He pulled each door open wide, yanked the seats forward, checked under the floor mats, reached into the center console and dumped receipts, napkins, a phone charger, loose change, and a handful of peppermints onto the driver's seat. He ran his hands along the seams of the upholstery, checking for hidden compartments that didn't exist, looking for contraband that was never there. He moved with the practiced carelessness of a man who had done this 100 times and never once faced a consequence. "Nothing," Brennan said from behind him. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. It wasn't a report. It was a plea. "Maybe we should stop." Pritchard ignored him completely. He walked back to Malcolm, stood behind him. Close. Too close. Malcolm could feel the warmth of Pritchard's breath on the back of his neck, could smell the stale coffee and something sour beneath it. "You know what your problem is?" Pritchard said, conversational now, almost friendly. The way a cat is friendly with a mouse it hasn't killed yet. "Your problem is you don't understand where you are. This is Whitmore Hills. People here worked 3 generations for what they have. They don't want to look out their windows and see." He paused. Let the silence fill in the word he didn't need to say. "People like you, walking around, breathing their air, driving their roads. You understand me? We haven't broken any law," Malcolm said. "Law," Pritchard snorted. "Let me tell you something about the law, big man. I am the law on this road. Right here, right now, I decide what's legal and what's not. And right now, a fat black man in a neighborhood he doesn't belong in, at an hour he shouldn't be out, in a car he can't afford. That's more than suspicious enough for me. That's practically a confession." He grabbed Malcolm's shoulder and spun him around. Malcolm's back hit the hood hard enough to rock the vehicle. Pritchard shoved him forward, chest first onto the metal, and pressed his forearm across Malcolm's upper back, pinning him like a specimen under glass. "Spread your arms." Malcolm spread them. Pritchard patted him down. Rough, deliberate. Not the procedural search they taught at the academy. Methodical, respectful, by the book. This was theater. This was about audience. This was about showing everyone on this dark road who held the power and who didn't. He checked Malcolm's pockets, waistband, ankles. Found nothing. Of course he found nothing. There was nothing to find. There was never anything to find. But finding something was never the point. "You're clean," Pritchard said. He didn't sound relieved. He sounded disappointed, like a fisherman who'd cast his net and come up empty and blamed the water instead of himself. Then he reached for the handcuffs. "Officer," Denise's voice cut through the night, sharp, cracking. "He hasn't done anything. You searched him. You searched the car. There's nothing. Please, just let us go home." Pritchard didn't look at her. Ma'am, I already told you to shut your mouth. He's my husband. You're putting handcuffs on my husband, and he hasn't committed a single crime. One more word. Pritchard turned his head just enough to fix her with a stare that had silenced better people in worse situations. One more word out of you, and I'm booking you for obstruction. You want to spend the night in a cell? Because I will make that happen. Don't test me. Denise's voice died in her throat. Calvin pulled her close. Not rough, not forceful. Just a hand on her shoulder that said, "Please, please stop before this gets worse." She was shaking. Not from the cool Georgia air. From everything she couldn't say. From every word that was clawing at the inside of her chest and had nowhere to go. Pritchard turned back to Malcolm. He pulled his wrists behind his back, one, then the other, and closed the handcuffs. The metal ratcheted tight, tighter than necessary, tighter than regulation. Malcolm's fingers flexed once, then went still. On your knees. Malcolm lowered himself, slowly. 280 pounds settling onto the asphalt of Whitmore Hills Road. The gravel bit into his kneecaps through his trousers. The cold seeped through the fabric. He kept his back straight, his chin level, his eyes forward, looking at nothing and everything at the same time. This was the posture. The one every black man in America recognized. Not from training, but from inheritance. The one that said, "You have taken everything from me, except the one thing I will not give you. My dignity. You cannot have it. Not tonight. Not ever." Pritchard stood over him, flashlight aimed down like a spotlight on a stage he'd built himself. Badge glinting, belt creaking. The full machinery of the state behind him, and nothing but contempt in front of him. Stay right there, fat boy. Don't move. Don't speak. Don't even breathe too hard. We're not done with you yet. Malcolm knelt, silent, still. The handcuffs pressed grooves into the bones of his wrists. The asphalt pressed patterns into his knees. The night pressed against his skin from every direction. Heavy, humid, suffocating. Across the street, 2 more porch lights had come on. A woman in a bathrobe stood on her front steps, hand over her mouth. An old man leaned against his railing, watching with the tired eyes of someone who had seen this before and knew exactly what it was. And upstairs, in a window directly above the scene, the phone was still recording. The red dot blinked steadily in the dark, capturing every frame. The kneeling man, the standing officer, the wife held hostage by her own helplessness, the cousin frozen by survival. 4 officers surrounded Malcolm Foster now. 4 armed men in a half circle. 1 unarmed man on his knees in the middle. And not one of them, not Pritchard, not Brennan, not the 2 backup officers who had arrived and asked 0 questions, had the faintest idea what they had just done. None of them knew. Not yet, but they would. Before this night was over, every single one of them would understand exactly who they had forced onto his knees on this quiet, wealthy, self-righteous street. And by then, it would be far, far too late to take any of it back. Pritchard wasn't finished. He stood over Malcolm, hands on his hips, chest puffed, breathing hard through his nose like a man who'd just won something. But there was an itch, a nagging, restless feeling that told him the stop wasn't complete. He'd searched the car, searched the man, found nothing. And yet, he needed more. His eyes drifted to the charcoal suit crumpled on the ground beside the SUV. The garment bag had come open in the fall, and the jacket's inner pocket was visible, a slight bulge pressing against the silk lining. Pritchard walked over, picked up the jacket by the collar, holding it like something contaminated. He reached into the inside pocket and pulled out a leather bifold. "Well, what's this?" he muttered, flipping it open under his flashlight. An ID card. State issued. Official seal. A photograph. Malcolm's face, steady and serious, staring back at him from behind laminated plastic. And beneath the photograph, 2 lines of text. Pritchard read them. Then he read them again. His flashlight hand dropped half an inch. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The smirk that had lived on his face for the last 20 minutes, the one that had fueled every insult, every shove, every fat boy, dissolved. It didn't fade. It collapsed. Like a building losing its foundation in a single, silent second. Brennan noticed first. He'd been watching Pritchard's back, arms still folded, and he saw the shift. The way Pritchard's shoulders went rigid. The way the flashlight beam trembled against the jacket fabric. "What is it?" Brennan asked. "What'd you find?" Pritchard didn't answer. He stood motionless, the bifold open in his hand, staring at the ID card as if it might change if he looked at it long enough. As if the letters might rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. They didn't. "Pritchard." Brennan stepped closer. "What is it?" Nothing. Malcolm was still on his knees, hands cuffed behind his back, gravel embedded in his trousers. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. But he heard the silence, the sudden, complete absence of Pritchard's voice. And he knew. He lifted his chin, just slightly. And when he spoke, his voice was the calmest sound on that entire street. "My name is Malcolm Foster." A pause. Not for effect, for weight. "I am the mayor of Ridgewood, Georgia. The city that funds your department. The city that signs your paychecks. The city you swore an oath to serve." Each sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread outward, through Brennan, who took a full step backward. Through the 2 backup officers, whose hands fell from their belts simultaneously, as if they'd touched something hot. Through the woman in the bathrobe across the street, who whispered, "Oh my God," loud enough for the phone upstairs to pick up. And through Pritchard. Pritchard, who stood frozen, with the ID still open in his hand. Pritchard, whose face had gone from red to white to something beyond color. A grayish pallor that belonged in an emergency room, not on a residential street. Pritchard, who had spent 18 years building a kingdom of intimidation on this stretch of road, and who now watched it crumble in the time it took a man on his knees to say 14 words. The silence lasted 6 seconds. It felt like 6 years. Then Pritchard moved. Jerky. Mechanical. Like a man whose body was operating on autopilot while his brain was still trying to process the wreckage. Sir, this was standard." The words came out broken, unfinished, tumbling over each other like a man running downhill and losing his balance with every step. "Take the handcuffs off." Malcolm didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority doesn't shout. Authority waits. Pritchard fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking so badly that the keychain rattled against his belt buckle. He knelt behind Malcolm, and the irony of that image, the officer kneeling behind the man he'd forced to kneel, was not lost on anyone watching. He found the keyhole on the 3rd try. The cuffs clicked open. Malcolm brought his hands forward, slowly. He looked down at his wrists. 2 red grooves, deep, symmetrical, angry, circled the skin where the metal had been. The marks of a man who had been restrained for the crime of existing. He stood up, slowly, the way he did everything, deliberate, unhurried, refusing to let anyone else's urgency dictate his pace. He brushed the gravel dust from his trousers, straightened his shirt, rolled his sleeves down over the marks on his wrists, not to hide them, but because he wasn't ready to show them. Not yet. That evidence would be useful later. Denise broke free from Calvin's grip and ran to him. She grabbed his arm, her fingers finding the grooves on his wrists through the fabric. Her eyes went wide, then wet. She didn't speak. She just held on. Malcolm looked at Pritchard. The officer had retreated 3 steps. His flashlight was off. His hand was nowhere near his holster. He looked smaller now, physically smaller, as if the uniform had been inflated by arrogance and was now deflating in real time. "Your dash cam," Malcolm said. "It's been running this entire time, hasn't it?" It wasn't a question. Pritchard swallowed, nodded. Malcolm turned to the house across the street, where the old man still stood on his porch, watching. Then he looked up, to the window on the 2nd floor. The phone. The red dot. He didn't smile, but something settled behind his eyes. Something cold. Something patient. Something that said, "This is no longer your night. It's mine." "Your badge numbers," Malcolm said. "All 4 of you. Now." Pritchard started talking. Fast. Too fast. Words spilling out of him like water from a cracked pipe, desperate, uncontainable. "Sir, Mayor Foster, we received a report. A suspicious vehicle in the area, standard operating procedure. We had no way of knowing." "A report." Malcolm's voice was flat. "From who?" Pritchard's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. Because there was no report, no call, no suspicious vehicle alert logged in the system. There was only a black family in a nice car, and an officer who had decided what that meant before he ever flipped his lights on. "That's what I thought." Malcolm pulled out his phone, dialed 1 number. It rang twice. "Chief Holloway, this is Mayor Foster. I need you at the corner of Whitmore Hills and Oak Bend, now. Not in an hour, now." He hung up without waiting for a response. The next 19 minutes were the longest of Wade Pritchard's career. He stood by his cruiser, not leaning on it, not sitting inside it, just standing with his arms at his sides like a man awaiting sentencing. His partner Brennan stood 4 feet away, staring at his own shoes as though they held the answers to every question he'd failed to ask tonight. The 2 backup officers had retreated to their vehicle and were speaking in low, urgent whispers. The kind of conversation that starts with, "What the hell just happened?" and ends with, "We need to get our story straight." Malcolm didn't wait by the road. He walked Denise to the SUV and opened the door for her. She sat in the passenger seat with the door open, feet on the running board, hands in her lap. She hadn't spoken since the reveal. The tremor in her fingers said everything. Calvin leaned against the trunk, arms crossed, watching the 4 officers with the steady, burning gaze of a man memorizing every face and badge number. Because he knew none of them would tell the truth voluntarily. A black sedan pulled up at 11:47. Chief Raymond Holloway stepped out. 58 years old, gray at the temples, 26 years on the force. Polo shirt and khakis. Off-duty clothes. He'd been called out of his living room, and his face showed it. Then he saw the scene. Malcolm's wrists, red grooves where the handcuffs had been. Denise in the SUV with swollen eyes. The contents of the trunk scattered across the pavement. Gym bag, first aid kit, overnight bag with personal items exposed to the night. The charcoal suit crumpled in the dirt. Holloway's expression cycled through 3 stages in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, horror. "Mayor Foster." "Don't," Malcolm held up a hand. "Save the apology for the press conference." He pointed at Pritchard. "Officer Wade Pritchard, badge 4291. Pulled us over with 0 probable cause. Searched my vehicle without consent or a warrant. Subjected my family to racial slurs. Handcuffed me and forced me to kneel on the pavement. His dashcam recorded the entire encounter. He pointed at Brennan. Officer Kyle Brennan stood by and watched, confiscated my wife's phone when she tried to record. He pointed at the two backup officers. Those two arrived, assessed a scene. Black man in handcuffs, woman in tears, no evidence of any crime, and asked 0 questions. Malcolm lowered his hand. All 4 badges, tonight. Suspended without pay, pending a full investigation. Every dash cam and body cam recording preserved and turned over to the district attorney's office by morning. Holloway nodded. No argument. No negotiation. No institutional deflections. He turned to Pritchard and held out his hand. Badge and weapon, Wade. Pritchard looked at the outstretched palm. For one moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Defiance. The old muscle memory of a man who had never been held accountable. But then he looked past Holloway to the street, where 3 neighbors now stood on their porches, watching. And beyond them, the upstairs window, where the phone's red light still blinked. He unclipped his badge, unholstered his weapon, placed both in Holloway's open hand. Brennan did the same without being asked. His hands were shaking. The backup officers followed, silent, mechanical, like men sleepwalking through the first minutes of a nightmare they hadn't yet realized was real. By midnight, the street was quiet again. Porch lights clicked off one by one. The old man across the street nodded once, at Malcolm, not at the officers, and went inside. The video was uploaded at 12:14 a.m. By 2 o'clock, 40,000 views. By sunrise, 2 million. By noon the next day, #JusticeForMalcolm was trending in all 50 states. And Wade Pritchard's face was on every screen in America. The video didn't just go viral. It detonated. By Monday morning, every major news outlet in the country had the footage. CNN ran it on a loop. The SUV pulled over, the flashlight in Malcolm's face, the handcuffs clicking shut, the moment on his knees. Fox covered it with a split screen, the video on one side, Pritchard's department photo on the other. MSNBC brought in a panel of civil rights attorneys before breakfast. The New York Times ran a front-page piece titled, "The Mayor on His Knees, Ridgewood, and the Anatomy of a Traffic Stop." And the internet did what the internet does. It dug. Within 48 hours, Wade Pritchard's entire career was laid bare. 14 complaints of racial profiling in 8 years. 14. Every single one filed by a Black or Hispanic resident of Ridgewood. Every single one investigated by the department's Internal Affairs Division. And every single one, without exception, marked unfounded and buried in a filing cabinet on the 3rd floor of the police station. The pattern was staggering. A black teenager pulled over for driving too slowly in a school zone. A Hispanic family stopped at a gas station because their van matched a description that was never logged. A black pastor detained outside his own church at 6 a.m. because he appeared to be casing the building. A retired black schoolteacher handcuffed in a grocery store parking lot because she fit the profile of a shoplifter who turned out to be a white woman half her age. 14 complaints. 14 lives disrupted. 14 stories that never made the news. Until now. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation opened a formal inquiry on Tuesday. They didn't just look at Pritchard. They looked at the system that protected him. And what they found was worse than anyone expected. Chief Raymond Holloway had personally reviewed 9 of the 14 complaints. In each case, he had signed off on the unfounded determination within 72 hours, without interviewing the complainants, without reviewing available dashcam footage, without conducting a single follow-up. 9 rubber stamps. 9 families told their experience didn't matter. 9 times the system worked exactly as it was designed, not to find truth, but to maintain order. Their order. 3 other officers in the department had similar complaint histories. The Internal Affairs Division had no independent oversight. The department's use of force policy hadn't been updated since 2009, and the body camera program, approved by the City Council 2 years earlier, had never been implemented. The cameras sat in boxes in a storage room, still sealed, still wrapped in plastic. Holloway resigned on Wednesday. His statement was 4 sentences long and used the word regret twice, without once using the word sorry. He cited personal reasons and the desire to allow the department to move forward without distraction. He did not mention Malcolm Foster. He did not mention the 14 complaints. He drove away from the station in his personal vehicle and was not seen in Ridgewood again. The district attorney's office moved fast. Pritchard was arrested on Thursday, charged with deprivation of civil rights under color of law, unlawful detention, and illegal search and seizure. He was booked at the county jail, photographed in an orange jumpsuit, and released on $50,000 bail. His mugshot was online within the hour. The same face that had sneered "Fat Boy" under a flashlight was now staring out from every screen in America, slack-jawed and pale, stripped of everything that had ever made him feel powerful. Brennan cooperated. He had no choice. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the 6 months of silence and compliance, he knew it was the right thing to do. He gave a full deposition, confirmed there was no suspicious vehicle report, confirmed Pritchard initiated the stop based solely on the occupant's race, confirmed the search was conducted without consent, confirmed he had taken Denise's phone and deleted the recording on Pritchard's orders. His testimony was devastating. Not because it revealed anything new. The dash cam and the neighbor's video had already captured everything. But because it came from inside, from a fellow officer, from a man who had stood 3 feet away and watched it happen and done nothing, and was now, finally, saying out loud what everyone already knew. The trial lasted 11 days. The prosecution played the dashcam footage 3 times. Each time, the courtroom went silent. The jury watched Malcolm step out of the SUV, watched Pritchard circle him with the flashlight, heard every slur, every insult, every "fat boy" and "you people" and "you disgust me." Watched the handcuffs close. Watched a man lower himself to his knees on a public street in the country he helped govern. Pritchard's defense attorney argued procedural discretion, argued that the stop was within departmental guidelines, argued that Pritchard had no way of knowing Malcolm's identity and therefore acted in good faith. The jury didn't buy it. They deliberated for 4 hours and 16 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a 61-year-old woman named Constance Webb, who had spent 30 years on the bench and had seen more than her share of cases like this, looked at Pritchard for a long time before she spoke. "Officer Pritchard," she said, "you swore an oath to protect and serve every citizen of this city. Instead, you used your badge as a weapon and your authority as a license to humiliate. The defendant's identity is irrelevant to this court's decision. Had Malcolm Foster been a janitor, a teacher, a bus driver, the violation would be the same. The law does not protect people selectively, and neither will this court." 3 years, federal prison, permanent ban from law enforcement in the state of Georgia. Pritchard stood motionless as the sentence was read. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't react. He stared straight ahead with the empty, hollowed-out expression of a man who had spent his entire career believing the rules didn't apply to him, and had just learned, in the most public way possible, that they did. The 2 backup officers received 6-month suspensions without pay and mandatory retraining. Both were reassigned to desk duties. Neither returned to patrol. Malcolm sat in the gallery through every day of the trial. He didn't testify. He didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself. But he was there, every morning, front row, suit pressed, hands folded, watching justice move at its own deliberate, imperfect, painfully necessary pace. On the last day, as the courtroom emptied, a reporter asked him how he felt. Malcolm paused, adjusted his cuffs, the same gesture he'd made on Whitmore Hills Road the night everything changed. "This isn't about me," he said. "This is about the 14 people who came before me. The ones who filed complaints and were ignored. The ones who didn't have a camera. The ones who didn't have a title. This is for them." 6 months later, Malcolm Foster stood behind a podium at the Georgia State Capitol. The room was packed. Legislators in dark suits filled the chamber seats. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras mounted on tripods, red recording lights glowing like a constellation of witnesses. Civil rights leaders sat in the gallery, some who had marched in the 60s, some who had tweeted in the 20s. All of them here for the same reason. Denise sat in the front row. Same posture she'd had on Inauguration Day. Back straight, chin up, hands folded in her lap. But different eyes. These were the eyes of a woman who had watched her husband kneel on asphalt in handcuffs and get back up. The eyes of a woman who had swallowed her screams on a dark road so that her silence could become something louder. Calvin sat beside her, arms crossed, jaw set, still watching, still memorizing, still carrying the weight of that night in the rigid line of his shoulders. On the podium in front of Malcolm lay a single document, 12 pages. The Foster Act. It mandated body cameras for every officer in the state of Georgia, not as a suggestion, not as a pilot program, but as law. It required independent civilian oversight boards for every department with more than 50 officers. It established a statewide database for tracking complaints of racial profiling. No more filing cabinets, no more rubber stamps, no more unfounded determinations, signed by the same people being accused. It banned pretextual stops based on neighborhood demographics. And it created a fund, named after the 14 complainants whose cases had been buried in Ridgewood, to provide legal representation to victims of police misconduct who couldn't afford an attorney. Malcolm looked out at the chamber. He didn't see politicians. He saw a room full of people who had the power to decide whether what happened to him would keep happening to others. He picked up the pen. "This bill," he said, "is not about one night on Whitmore Hills Road. It's not about one officer or one set of handcuffs or one man who was told he didn't belong in his own city." He paused. The room was silent. "This bill is about the stops that don't go viral, the ones without cameras, the ones where the person pulled over isn't the mayor. They're the janitor, the nurse, the kid driving home from his first job, the ones where nobody records, nobody investigates, nobody cares." He looked down at the pen in his hand, then at his wrists. The marks were gone now. The skin had healed weeks ago, but he could still feel them. Late at night, when the house was quiet and Denise was asleep, he could still feel the cold metal tightening, the gravel pressing into his knees, the weight of a uniform standing over him in the dark. 14 people filed complaints before me, Malcolm said. 14. And nothing happened. Not because the system failed, but because the system worked exactly the way it was built to work. This bill rebuilds that system, from the ground up. He signed the document. The pen scratched across paper in a room so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum. The chamber erupted. Applause, first from the gallery, then from the floor. Denise pressed her fingers to her lips. Calvin unfolded his arms for the first time all morning and brought his hands together. Slow, deliberate, heavy claps that carried more than approval. They carried relief. Outside the Capitol, a crowd had gathered. Hundreds of people, families, students, activists, strangers who had seen a video 6 months ago and hadn't been able to forget it. They held signs. Some read, #Justice for Malcolm. Others read, #Foster Act. One, held by an elderly woman near the front, read simply, 14. Malcolm walked out into the afternoon sun. He stood on the steps, looked at the crowd, and adjusted his cuffs. The same gesture, the same man, a different day. So let me ask you something. If Malcolm Foster hadn't been the mayor that night, if he'd been anyone else, do you think those officers would have ever been held accountable? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear what you think. And if this story made you feel something, anything, hit that share button. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. Because these stories don't change anything if they stay in one place. Subscribe if you haven't already. We tell stories like this every week. Stories that don't make it easy, but make it matter.
I got to ask you on something. Be honest. If that man wasn't a mayor, just a regular guy driving home with his family, you think anything would change? You think anybody would have been held accountable? You think it would have made the news? Nah. And that's the whole problem. Justice shouldn't have a VIP section. Your rights don't kick in based on your job title. They are supposed to be there for everybody. But we all know that's not how it works. Not yet. And here's what keeps me up. 14 people said something before him. 14 filed complaints, told the truth. God ignores everyone because the system wasn't built to listen to them. It was built to protect itself. And it did for years until it couldn't anymore. But that's why I believe in people who get knocked down and get back up, not for revenge, but to make sure nobody else has to kneel on that same pavement. That's the real leadership, not the title, not the office, the choice to turn your worst night into somebody else's protection. So tell me, if it happened to you and you had the power to change things, what would you do? Drop it in the comments. If this one got you, share it, like it, subscribe. Because the stuffs that don't go viral matter just as much as the ones that do.